We are live.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Thursday night edition of the Down Ballot Progressive Candidate Summit. We have a very exciting conversation on our hands tonight, and that is with Betsy Sweet, who is running for the Democratic nomination to take on Susan Collins in Maine. Now, let me give you a little context here. You'll remember that we also spoke to Andrew Romanoff, who is running for a Senate seat against John Hickenlooper in Colorado. What do both of these things have in common? And this is also true with the Democratic Senate primary in Kentucky with Amy McGrath. So what do John Hickenlooper and Amy McGrath and Betsy Sweet's opponent have in common? They were chosen by Chuck Schumer and the Democratic establishment elite. But what's happening in this country is this huge energy that's coming from the bottom of things, from people who I feel represent the real soul, the traditional energy of the Democratic Party. And that is basically what is now defined more as progressives. So there are a lot of people who are pushing back about that because we don't like the idea that some people are in some back rooms deciding who the candidate should be. I certainly saw enough of how that stuff works on the presidential level, but this works also on the congressional levels and it works on the senatorial levels. And we have to be very, very hip to this and to remember that the people who represent that corporatist establishment, this is who Chuck and Tom and the guys want to have in there, usually, number one, are chosen in part because they have money to spend on their candidacies, and number two, get money from the establishment because they represent the more corporatist policies. So they represent the more corporatist policies and get the corporate donations. And also, as in the case of John Hickenlooper just the other day, the Democratic Party throws in its resources. So same thing going on here in Maine. Many of us know Susan Collins. She's been seen by many of us a lot of times as a more moderate, well-considered, genuine high-principled conservative Republican, but she's really made some disappointing choices. The one that really got to me was I was done. Was Brett Kavanaugh. Anyway, a lot of energy to get Susan Collins, have a wonderful, beautiful, nice retirement, get a Democratic woman in there. There is a woman, she's been chosen. She's the one that the establishment says should happen. She is not a progressive. However, there is a progressive and a wonderful progressive. And she happens to be someone that I've known for years. So I'm really excited to have her here with me. Betsy Sweet. Betsy, hi, how are you? I need you to unmute yourself. Hi.
Hi. I am so excited to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. And Marianne, I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. These down ballot conversations are so incredibly important. So hats off to you. Thank you. Thank you.
Everybody knows intellectually, of course, that Congress is a co-equal branch, but we don't normally get to know the congressional candidates as well as we get to know the presidential ones. And also there's been this idea, well, if it's not my state or not my district, then it's not that relevant to my life, when in fact it is. It's very relevant because everybody in Congress votes on these issues that affect all of us. And of course, you're running for the Senate. And as we know, the Republicans are now in charge of the Senate. We need to get the Senate in the hands of the Democrats. Once again, though, not just any Democrat, they're different shades of blue. Susan Collins is one, we really want to get back in the blue column, but a blue like you, Betsy. So I'm thrilled to have you here.
I'm thrilled to be here. And if we don't get the Senate back, it doesn't matter who's president, because Mitch McConnell will still be in charge and things will pile up on his desk just like they are now. And so this race and the other ones around the country where we have a chance to flip it are critical. And it's so great that people are paying attention across the country.
I think people do know, a lot of people are aware of the idea that Susan Collins, she's not real popular in Maine right now. People are open to a Democrat in that seat. I think that's fair to say. Yeah. Tell the audience, I want people to know a little bit about you, Betsy. You've been at this work for 37 years. You and I have both been around for a very long time.
A long time.
Let people know you've done such extraordinary work with family leave. You've been a long time advocate about clean elections, getting the money out of politics. I want people to know what you have done. You have a stellar resume of having done extraordinary politically activistic work in Maine. So let everybody know.
Oh, well, thanks, Marianne. So yeah, I've been an activist for almost 40 years here. And it comes from my dad. So I'm the youngest of 5. And my dad said to us kids, when we're growing up, you kids, you make sure you leave a place better than you found it. And he meant sweep the floor and make the beds. I thought he meant change the world. So I was like, okay. So I actually started out knocking on doors for the Equal Rights Amendment back in 1978, and then went to work for a women's peace organization. And then when I came to Maine, I worked for the Women's Lobby and the Commission for Women. But basically, I have been working so hard to make sure that people whose voices have not been heard in the halls of our state legislature and in those back rooms and in the budget hearings and when the budget's being decided, all of those things, that those people have, all those of us have a voice at the table, that we actually get to be there with someone who knows the legislators, who knows what the process is. And so I've used that organizing ability and my ability to be that bridge between what's happening inside and the organizing we do outside to help pass, as you said, the first Family Medical Leave Act in the country back in 1986. And so this was before there was a national one, but there were people in Maine who were losing their jobs because they were staying home to take care of their loved ones. And that didn't match anyone's values. So we said, oh, we can, and of course, and then the other thing was clean elections, which is Maine. I helped research and write and pass the first public financing system for elections in the country. And the thing that ties those two things together, we'll talk about more about money in politics, but the thing that ties those two things together is, and most of the work I've done actually, like you, is everyone says it's impossible when we first start the battle. They say, oh, Betsy, that's never, oh, you can't ever do that. That will never pass. What are you talking about? Until we come together and have made it possible. So when people speak up and organize and get together, we made things that people said were impossible, we make them possible. And so that's
only impossible until they're done.
Right.
So it's so interesting, though. Something I felt very strongly when I was running was that the Republicans sometimes have more chutzpah. The Tea Party didn't say it can't be done. The Trump supporters in his election didn't say it can't be done. They said, we want it done, and the Republican establishment is going to have to stand aside. I don't know why Democrats sometimes have this deference to the Democratic establishment, the DNC, et cetera, that makes no sense. They're a private corporation. They have no governmental function, and they provide too often a kind of logjam, a real obstruction to the voice of the people. Yeah. And that's something that's happening in your campaign right now. You were telling me some pretty stunning and pretty horrific numbers about the money that is being spent, what your opponent in the primary race stands for. You want to give people a little bit of an idea of what's going on there?
I firmly believe that people in Maine, voters in Maine, should decide who their candidate is.
Thank you.
It should be up to us, not somebody in Washington, not voters. Right. It should be up to voters. We shouldn't have a pollster. We shouldn't have someone in Washington deciding for us. And I think Maine people feel that way strongly. But in this race already, we have this proliferation, like the nuclear arms race, of money in politics. In this race already, just the DSCC candidate has already spent between 11 and 12 $million in Maine. So in Maine, we only have 1 million people. And
hold on, I want you to slow down because I want everybody to be very clear what you're saying. You said the DSCC chosen candidate. So everybody, that means the Democratic Senatorial Committee candidate. So what we have is, like, you would read about how hundreds of years ago, these men would be in back rooms, usually smoking cigars, deciding who the candidate would be. That's contrary to democracy. And that's what what Betsy means when she says this shouldn't be a bunch of people in Washington deciding who the appointed candidate is going to be. It should be, in her case, the people in Maine. Just like I felt in the presidential race, it should be the people in these primaries deciding. This is a very, very big deal. And this is also a signal to each and every one of you. If you like what you hear tonight, Betsy's website is Betsy Sweet, sweet the way it should be, SWEET.com. So as I've been saying, if everybody who's listening to these summits, who likes these candidates, sends in even $1, we will do something for these candidates. So I want to go back to what Betsy was saying, but I wanted to make sure you knew what the DSCC is. I know a lot of you do, but some of you might not. Okay, Betsy.
Oh, thanks. Anyway, and so the amount of money that's being spent, I'm being outspent about 40 to 1 if you count the independent expenditures and and I'll be outspent, but I will never be outworked. But so imagine a candidate.
I will be outspent, but I will never be outworked.
Yeah. So imagine spending $11 million in an election in which all predictions are there will probably be 100,000 people voting. Just do the math. And And this is at a time during COVID when people in Maine have lost their jobs, when we don't have enough food for, a lot of people don't have enough food to put on the table. We can't pay rents and mortgages. And where's that money going? That money is going to ads on TV, most of them negative. It's going to high-paid consultants in the political industrial complex in Washington who tell people what to say, how to say it, what to wear, instead of having open debates and forums where we have conversations where, as you know, as you do, dive deep into policy and then let people say, you know what, that's the person I want to represent me.
Okay, so you just brought up something interesting because I couldn't agree with you more. We have to have a deep conversation, none of the shallow, silly stuff. And what I learned campaigning myself is that the American people are very intelligent and are ready for a serious conversation. You, however, according to what I've read, have a primary opponent who will not show up to debate you. Is that what's happening here?
Yeah. So we've had, I think there's been 10 forums in which there's another candidate. There's 3 of us in this race, and Maine has ranked choice voting, which is so awesome. And I'll talk about that if you want. And in those 10 forums, they have not showed up. So they're very willing to do their own, town halls where they're the only people speaking and the questions are scripted ahead of time. But in terms of showing up, now there's been so much. So we had our first TV debate just last week, and she was instructed not to show up. So
tell me, wait. She was instructed not to show up. Who
I don't-
instructed her, Betsy?
I'm sorry, maybe that's mean. She did not show up, regardless. However, for whatever reason, she didn't show up. And so there's only 3 TV stations in Maine. This is one of the only TV debates that have been scheduled, and they just didn't come. And one thing that is hard for me is they could say this is a campaign strategy, and at least that's honest. But they say she's got a scheduling conflict, and and the thing was pre-recorded. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But so anyway, and that's just it. And forget me and forget her. It's not fair to voters.
That's right.
Voters have the right, I believe, to listen to candidates, ask questions, and say it's not just the answers on policy. It's how we think. It's what values we apply to things. How we talk about things that we don't know that much about. Who are we going to talk to? Those are the kinds of things that this is a very important position, right? We're in trouble. This country is in trouble. And if we don't have leaders that we can count on, that we know are there for us, then we don't have the right representation. And it's the voters who should decide that. So it's really unfortunate, but it's also, I think we're in for a lot of changes. And I think, I think everyone's going to be surprised around the country. Next week with, Andrew's race, and the next week with Amy McGrath's race, and then 2 weeks later in our race, I think that people are going to be surprised because people are realizing more and more every day how broken our system is.
Yes. And we did hear from Andrew Romanoff in his race, and he is standing for these more progressive issues. And that's what I want to ask you about now. What are the issues that you're standing for, and how do they contrast with the woman that you're mainly running against?
Yeah. Well, so the 2 big contrasts are Medicare for all and the Green New Deal. And, I believe everywhere before this, before COVID, we had held 35 town halls. We had another 50 planned in every corner of the state. And, everywhere I went, and I'm sure you found it too, healthcare was the #1 thing I was asked about.
And all the polls show nationally, even among Republicans, Americans are ready for Medicare for all. So what is her reasoning for not standing for Medicare for all?
She wants to do Affordable Care Act and, the nibble around the edges thing. And, and I think that, again, she wants to provide access to everybody. And I think that we have to make the distinction between access and coverage. People can have access, but we can't pay the deductibles. We can't pay the copays. And, so for me, I feel like within my own insurance, unless something cataclysmic happens, I'm $25,000 in before I get a dime. And that doesn't feel like health insurance to me.
I felt before COVID, there was a way to do that on a sliding scale myself, but not now. With COVID, it's just simply too dangerous. So what about Green New Deal? Talk to me about what you mainly stand for. I want to hear about I want to hear your passion. I want everybody to hear your passion, not only on healthcare, but on the Green New Deal, on the environment, on getting money out of politics, on clean elections.
Yeah. So
I know what you said.
So Green New Deal, I know that everyone's listening to this, that the scientists say we have less than 10 years. You know, and so these ideas that we're going to do something by 2050 or 2070, we're not going to be around by then. So the thing that's so exciting to me and frustrating at the same time is we have really smart people who can figure out the technology, who we can do the production of green energy. We can use regenerative agriculture to sequester carbon, you know, no-till agriculture. That doesn't require any technology. It just requires a change in how we do farming practices. You know, we have many ways that we can address climate change right now. But here's the thing that I'm so excited about, is that for years, you know, I've been doing environmental work in advocacy for almost 40 years. And it used to be that if you were for the environment, you were against the economy, right? They were like this. And so now we have this opportunity to do what is right for the climate and start to address the climate crisis that we have and create good, new, high-paying jobs that can't be outsourced to another country that are right here. And
that's why it's called the Green New Deal. That's what the Green Deal was. I mean, the New Deal was.
Exactly. And for Maine, we are at the cusp. We could be the epicenter of the production of green energy between the ocean and the wind and the sun and our forests, I mean, and agriculture that we have. We could produce that energy here and export it to the rest of New England. And there's so many incredible options. You know, one of the things I'm most excited about, this is just a little wonky for a second, but in Denmark, they just commercialized this pod, which looks like half a submarine. It's about 80 feet long, and it's got paddles on either side of it that just rest on the ocean. It looks like a centipede, you know, and one of those pods, just the kinetic energy alone in one of those pods can power 4,000 homes.
You're kidding.
No, so Maine, we have a long,
right there on the water.
If we stretched our coastline out, it's longer than California's because it goes, you know. And so we could have these pods all the way down our coast and then export that energy on a public grid to the rest of New England. So, and we would create jobs and, you know, so I just think that there is so much that we could do, but we're not going to do it while we're spending $20 billion a year in subsidies for fossil fuel companies in this country. And so that's why, you know, and so anyway, so that is another one. And then the other one, as you said, is getting money out of politics, because that to me is the rotting core of democracy.
It is. It's the cancer underlying all the other cancers.
Exactly.
But we're not going to be able to overturn Citizens United anytime soon, although Gorsuch and John Roberts have been a little more enlightened than usual in the last couple of years.
Lately, right?
So what we're going to need a constitutional amendment to establish public funding for federal campaigns, right, Betsy?
Yes. Well, and I think there's two things we can do before then.
Okay.
One is that in Maine, as I said, we wrote the Clean Elections Act, which pairs small dollar donors, $5, like really small, with public financing. So you get a certain number of, so you show that you have some momentum. And then I think we can do that for federal candidates because it's optional.
And some other states are doing similar.
Yes, Arizona has a similar program. So that's a thing we could do. And then the other thing I think we need to do is we need to limit the campaign season to 12 weeks because nobody needs to listen to this for 2 years.
Okay, slow down for a second. I want to ask you a question. Would you want that on the presidential level too?
Yeah, well, let me talk about it on the presidential level, because I think that you could, be really clear. You could campaign for as long as you wanted. You could go hold, like you did, you could go hold town halls. You could go, you could go and talk to people, do what real democracy is. The thing that you couldn't do is raise over a certain threshold of money and spend it except for those 12 weeks, right? And that would cut down dramatically, especially for Congress, especially for, Senate and representatives, the amount of money required. And Marianne, every other country does this.
Yeah.
England is 6 weeks. Nordic countries are 8 weeks.
No, I understand that.
Right.
The contest I see there in my mind is, part of me is like, wouldn't that be great? Another part of me recognizes that over a period of time, you get to know a candidate, and that takes longer than 12 weeks. On the other hand, we got to know Donald Trump when we still put him in the office. I think his character, a man who says, I could murder somebody on Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't, has already shown who he was, and he was, yeah.
Well, I think the other thing it addresses a little bit is voter fatigue, right? So people get, in my race, the other two candidates have been on the air since January.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, I don't even want to watch another thing. Like, right. So we have this. So anyway, I just think that people would pay more attention.
Yes.
Be more focused.
Yeah.
say, oh, okay, I've got 3 months to really pay attention to
Yeah.
this.
Well, what I noticed, what I found to be true was what people told me was true, but I didn't know until I was actually there. And they used to say when I was running in Iowa, New Hampshire, no matter what they're saying on TV, the voters don't pay attention until after Thanksgiving. The voters don't pay attention until that last month, which is why I shouldn't have left the race. Very, very interesting. Well, this is how I feel about what you said before. You said that when it comes to the environmental issues, we have the environmental scientists, we have the environmental engineers, we have the environmental experts that would know how to create that just transition. You were talking about the sequestration of the carbon, you're talking about a more enlightenment around agriculture, all of those things which Americans understand now. But the thing that fascinates me, Betsy, is that what I have seen is that that's true in every single area. When it comes to America's traumatized children, we have the social workers, we have the experts in early childhood, in the criminal justice system. We have the people and the projects that are already displaying best practices, having to do with gang members, having to do with education, having to do with people who are recently incarcerated. You know, there was Bill Clinton who said years ago something that I have never forgotten. He said, there's nothing wrong with America that can't be made right by what's right with America. But the problem we have is that these people who know what to do, right? Like you said, we have the environmental scientists. When you have a president who has, the first thing he did was he replaced a genuine environmental expert as the head of the EPA with an oil lobbyist, who's now been replaced by a chemical lobbyist, and he has gutted the budget for the EPA. 25%, he's taken advantage of COVID. To do that. I love how everybody talks about we shouldn't defund the police, but they don't seem to have a problem when they defund the EPA and they defund education and they defund Head Start. This is why we need people like you in the Senate, Betsy. This is why we need you here. I'm sure that you all agree with me. Please go to betsysweet.com. You've already heard about how the big money, the establishment money, the corporate money is going to go behind one of her opponents. You understand what that money goes for. It goes for TV ads. Then people tend to hear a name more, so they think they're going to vote for that person, but they haven't even had the chance to really know what the issues are because that person may or may not show up for debates. We all know what the situation is, but at this point, until we do have public funding for federal campaigns, if we want these incredible people like Betsy in office, we're going to have to do something, and no amount is too small. Please go to betsysweet.com, or you can go to Progressive Candidate Summit and you'll see the donation button for all the various candidates. Betsy, you want to ask a couple of questions, answer a couple of questions from people?
Sure, I'd love that.
Now, the first one is particularly intriguing to me because she's 15 years old. She's a climate activist, 15-year-old climate activist. She's a rising junior at Mount Desert Island High School in Maine. She's a member of the Climate Emergency Action Coalition. She's also the youth representative of the Bal Harbour Task Force on Climate. So you had a tough question, I'm sure, but I assuming you can handle it. Sarohi Kumar. Sarohi Kumar, come on into the Zoom room. I look forward to seeing you.
Yeah. I have one of the things while we're waiting for her to get on, one of the things I have loved the most is interacting and learning from and listening to young people because they're just phenomenal.
Yeah, they are. And the world belongs to them. So Rohi, hi, welcome.
Hi.
Lovely to have you here. Ask away. Ask Betsy what you want to ask her.
Hi, Betsy.
Hi, Sarohi. Nice to see you.
I'm not sure what we talked about and what was happening while I was transitioning, but I am a climate activist, and I wanted to ask you a question about the Green New Deal.
Sure.
So the Green New Deal really is the best solution that we have for the two of the big crises we're currently battling, the climate crisis and the unemployment crisis. But why is it that we haven't had any action towards implementing a Green New Deal in Congress?
Because of who Congress belongs to, right, Betsy?
It's a great question. Because the Green New Deal, as you said, it can create 24 million new jobs. We can do a just transition for people moving out of other industries, and it will address the climate through weatherization, through green energy production, through agriculture changes. There's a lot that it will do, and it is, and we are going to need a new deal coming out of this economic pandemic. So the question is, your question that was spot on, which is if everyone understands it. And in Maine, we live the climate crisis. Our lobsters, our fisheries, our agriculture, we are in it every single day. So why is it that when so many people support it, the vast majority of Americans understand it, that it's not happening in Congress? And I think that there's really only one reason, and that's money. And, and if you look at the amount of money that, first of all, that we give to fossil fuel companies. We give them $20 billion a year. And we do that because they line the pockets of politicians.
125 million last year alone in lobbying.
Wow. And then the coal companies and these are people who benefit from the system as it is. And I think the thing that we're missing in the Senate and in Congress are elected leaders who are willing to pull the curtain back and tell the truth. Tell the truth about what's actually happening. And I think when we do that, and we can say to people, look, this is what's happening. I used to do this when I went around to my town halls before COVID. And I'd say, okay, we've got $20 billion here. If you want that to go to healthcare or to Head Start and children, raise your hand. If we have $20 billion. If you want that to go to fossil fuel oil companies, some of the most profitable companies in the world, raise your hand. It was always unanimous. So this is a democracy. So if it's unanimous, why isn't it happening? Your question is perfect. And that is the reason. And I think it points to how broken our democracy is, and also a pathway to fixing it. And I think one of the things that's really, as hard as the times are now that we are going through, I think one of the exciting things is we now have an opportunity to actually do the things, and having people who need jobs, people who say, okay, where are we going to turn? Now, all of a sudden, they're listening in a way that they haven't before. And they're going to say, it's not okay for you to take care of the corporate, the fossil fuel companies and the coal companies. You need to take care of us. So I'm hopeful, and but we need people to be bold and not say, oh, I think I used to say, well, I still say it, we have the world's on fire, literally and figuratively. And so bringing a watering can to the edges is not going to do.
That's right.
Yeah, we need bold action. So that's what I would say.
And so, Rohi, as Betsy was saying, we have 10 years. A lot of scientists say we only have 7 years. And I'm sure you're aware, if we don't make a massive shift, there could be whole areas, swaths of countries and whole swaths of continents that are where the heat is so great that food can't be grown. Huge economic collapse, hundreds of millions perhaps of environmental refugees. I think that COVID has awakened a lot of people. We were skating on very thin ice when it comes to infectious diseases. There wasn't anybody handling things. And we are skating on similarly thin ice on environmental issues. I think we're skating on very thin ice as well on nuclear issues, Betsy.
Yeah.
And this is what happens when you basically decimate your governmental structure. And when you have a government that has become beholden to corporate forces and corporate money, as opposed to the people of the United States. That we're not a government of the people, by the people, for the people at present. We are more a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. But Sarohi, it's so great that at the age of 15, you're on it. And you'll be like ready to hit the ground running when you're 18 and when you can vote. But I'm sure that Betsy is able to use people like yourself in her campaign, right, Betsy? Not only young people who can still be on the phone, et cetera. Isn't that also true of people who are watching right now who are not?
Yes. I mean, one of the upsides of COVID is you can help with this campaign from anywhere in the country. We are making thousands of calls a week to people who are going to actually vote. We are texting, we are writing letters, and you can do that. You can do that from anywhere in the country. So if you are able, if you've got a couple of hours a week, a couple hours a day, and you can help us, we will put you to work like that. And again, it will be challenge by choice. So if you hate making phone calls, you can text. If you hate texting, you can write a letter.
Everybody, I hope you really, I'm sure that you share with me the excitement at the idea of having Betsy in the Senate. We can have the government that we want, but we have to work for it. We have to work for it now. So no matter what state you live in, you can go to betsysweet.com, you can sign up, you can volunteer. The point is to be part of the solution. When I was young, they used to say, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And cynicism is just an excuse for not helping. Our government has been taken over. It has been. Our government has been turned into little more than a system of legalized bribery. But as you've probably heard me say so many times, this is not the first time that we have very undemocratic forces right there in front of us and really really destroying the basic pillars of our government, but we have pushed back against them before. We pushed back against slavery, which we pushed back against institutionalized suppression of women, we pushed back against segregation, and we are pushing back against this corporate tyranny right now. The only question you have to ask yourself is whether or not you are participating in the solution. So BetsySweet.com, ProgressiveCandidateSummit.com. Find out about the progressive candidates and do everything you can to help them get elected. Anything else, Rohi, that you want to ask Betsy? Or did she satisfy you with her answer? Did she do okay?
Yeah, your candor is much appreciated. It's nice to see someone acknowledge the ugly truth.
That's how I feel about you too, Betsy. That's how I feel. I love, and I have to say to you as your friend, I really watched you grow. You're like out there in a way that really has gone with the years. Forgive me, everybody. I just dropped a piece of paper, so I'm going to go pick it up because I need to read the name of the next question.
Well, while you're picking up your paper, I mean, I think that this time's demanded, right? We can't BS our way through this. We can't, and I think the other thing is, especially young people like Sarohi, I feel I am accountable to them, and their BS detector is huge and really good. And, so when if you give a canned answer, if you say, well, we'll think about, like, they're right on it. I've got 3 beautiful daughters of my own, twin 22-year-olds and a 25-year-old. And, they've trained me very well. It's like, yeah, that's not going to do. So I think that that's what's required. And I think that's one of the reasons that I think this is the moment for this kind of work. And I am so grateful for your questions, Rohi, and for your activism. I know you work so hard, and I'm really grateful.
And so, Rohi, when we were your age, we were you, right, Betsy?
Right? Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarohi. Okay, that's the second question, and her name is Linda Homer. So if Linda Homer could come into the Zoom room, make sure that you unmute yourself and ask away. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. So there's Betsy, and ask her what you want to ask her.
So Betsy, I wanted to ask you about mental health. And mental health issues have not had a champion in the Senate since Senator Paul Wellstone. And right now, with the calls to defund the police and reinvest in community services, which are being heard nationwide and around the world, how can this movement positively affect the mental health policy work?
Wow. Well, thanks for that question, Linda. So I've been a mental health advocate for over 30 years, a community-based mental health services advocate. As a matter of fact, just before this Zoom, I was writing testimony for the legislature in Maine tomorrow about this very issue, because we have so many people who suffer with chronic and persistent mental illness, as well as many people. We have such a stressful world right now that many people are experiencing mental health issues. And so what we have done, what I believe, there's still such huge stigma around mental health. And so what we have done as a society, I think, is we have decided on issues that we don't know what to do with, or we don't know how to deal with them, we criminalize them. So we're spending millions and billions of dollars on giving military equipment to police, training to police. Our jails are full of people with mental health issues, and they're becoming the de facto mental health treatment centers, which they're not equipped to do, and they shouldn't do them because that's not who they are. That's not their job. And we send the police out to someone who is having a mental health crisis or someone who's having a substance abuse crisis, instead of getting them treatment, instead of getting them a social worker. And so I think that here we have this incredible coming together of what we're seeing in terms of racial justice and what police issues, and the desperate need for community mental health. And now is the time. I think we have a window here to transfer money. I was listening, somebody said yesterday, I was listening to a podcast that in terms of substance abuse, right? Opioid epidemic and substance abuse epidemic is huge, right? In Maine and everywhere else. There are almost no places in this country that if you are if you're addicted to opioids, that you can go tomorrow and get help. You have to wait, you have to, but every police station in America has a narcotics unit. Something is very wrong about that. Those are wrong priorities, and they're not going to solve the problem. Worse, not only is it not the priorities that you and I probably share, but it doesn't solve the problem. Yeah. And if we look at what happened in Atlanta the other night, where this man was killed, right? And it's horrific. But just imagine a different scenario. Imagine the call comes and a social worker goes and knocks on the window gently and says, "Hey, you okay? We heard you were asleep. Are you all right?" And yeah, I've been drinking at a party. Okay, let's just pull your car over here. Do you need food? We'll get you some food. Okay, and then they talk to them. They find out, okay, I just had I didn't know my limit, whatever, fine. And then we'll get you a cab home. We'll get your car towed home. End of story. And if you need ongoing help, we'll get you that too. But no, we militarize it. And so we've got a border patrol between us and the issues we don't want to deal with, or we can't figure out how to deal with. And that's what our police have become. And they're not equipped to be that. There shouldn't be that. Our jails shouldn't be that. And so it's a funding issue. It's a priorities issue. And it's us taking, saying there are different ways to do this and better ways, more humane ways to do it. And then there's the whole racial aspect, which we know, and that all of those issues, because of all the racism in our society, people of color are more affected in those communities. So I think it's a great question. And I think it is a thread through everything. And I can't go without saying, and if we had Medicare for all, mental health treatment and substance abuse treatment would be covered and everyone could go get it if they needed it. So
it's an entire paradigm shift. It's a much more holistic understanding that we have. This is why I hope you'll consider supporting a Department of Peace. Because when we talk about people having mental health issues, when you have tens of millions of people who live with chronic economic tension and anxiety, and then they're experiencing this despair, we say they have a mental health issue. No, it's that the country has an injustice issue. The government has an issue where you've had this massive transfer of wealth, of all these resources into the hands of 1% of people. So the 1% controls more wealth than the bottom 90%. 90% of our people are squeezed into, for all intents and purposes, much a smaller pool of resources than they should have. Out of that comes all this despair. Out of this comes all this tension. Out of this comes all this anxiety. Out of this comes all this social pathology. And then we look at the people and say they have a mental health issue.
Right.
I think we want to be careful here, because a lot of what we call a mental health issue is simply a normal human response to the fact that life is too hard and should not be so hard in the richest country in the world. Sometimes the fact that you're upset about something is a sign of mental health.
Right. Yeah. It's exactly right.
People are like, something is really, really wrong here. So I appreciate, Betsy, that you were recognizing the intersectionality and the whole holistic paradigm. It's just like with sickness and health, you have to cultivate health. You can't just wait till there's all this eruption of symptomatology and then try to eradicate it or suppress the symptoms. You have to cultivate health. And in society, the same is true. You cultivate justice, you cultivate brotherhood, you cultivate community, you cultivate opportunity. And that's what creates a healthy society. And then these symptoms, which, as you said, we criminalize rather than heal. Right. And I think the good news is how many people recognize something's gone really, really wrong.
I think it is the thing that makes me feel hopeful, is how many people are recognizing what's gone wrong. And I do want to just say, 25 years ago in Maine, we were experiencing a whole series of hate crimes against people of color, immigrants, gay and lesbian people. And I was helping with what we did, when people were the victim. And an attorney and I were talking, and it's like, that's too late. The damage is really done then. What can we do to prevent this? So we started a project called the Civil Rights Team Project in our schools. So in high schools and middle schools across Maine, we went and we trained young people on how to recognize what was happening, and then how to be allies, and then how not to be a bystander, but to actually help, and to create mental health, to create justice, to create civil rights, because the adults weren't doing it. So the kids, we actually trained these kids, and this program is still going on now in many schools in Maine. And I just the other day on the campaign trail, right before we shut down, met a guy who came up to me, and he, an adult, and he said, "Oh, I'm so excited, Betsy. I'm so excited to see you. I met you. You trained me as a student." And he said, "And you took us when the KKK was marching. My civil rights team organized a counter rally. And it was the first time I realized that we had power to do something. And it changed my life. And I'm so happy you're," and it was just like,
It
was
all starts in childhood.
where you just think, and so I just want to say that, like, I do think that we have to look at it, as you have always said, Marianne, and so incredibly, we have to look at this holistically. And we have to start with our babies. We have to start with our young people, because first of all, we've given them a really broken place, but also they are open and they are willing to learn and they want to be leaders around this.
Well, our economic system was devised before women had a voice in the public realm. And raising children was just seen as women's work, whereas now we do have a voice in the public realm. And all three of us who are here now, you, Linda, and Betsy, and myself, we're all talking about these things in ways that do not fit into the old, narrow-minded, increasingly obsolete 20th century mindset, in which children are basically peripheralized. And when we talk about problems, we only talk about addressing them once people are already grown up. We know how much starts in the first 8 years of life. I don't know if you saw on my Instagram today, I posted something that I think is going around viral. This little boy who—
Oh, yes, I did see it.
I am smart, I am blessed, and I can do anything. What is he, 4 years old, 3
I
years?
know. Yes, it's awesome. Those affirmations. I mean, it is so amazing. Yeah, I did see that.
People can laugh all they want to, but a child growing up saying those affirmations on his way to school, you better believe that it matters. That's a good mother he's got. Yeah.
Totally.
Linda, you have anything else you want to ask Betsy? Are you cool with her answer?
Oh, I'm very cool with her answer. I love the fact that she tied her answer into Medicare for all, because if people don't see that now with COVID and the number of people in our state throughout the country that have lost their health insurance because it was tied to their job, we can't have that anymore. We need the mental health care in with our Medicare for all. You need your mental health, you need your physical health. Like you said, it all comes together to keep us whole. And we shouldn't have to be making choices as to what we think is important or what we think is a priority, because it's all important when it comes to who we are. So I honestly, someone who is not for Medicare for all is, it doesn't work for me in any way, shape, or form, because we also need to look out for everybody else. It's not about what we have, it's about what we can do for society and everybody else. And we need to look out for everybody, and we need to work together. And until we do that, this country is not going to heal and move forward.
I agree with you entirely. And when you have 93 million people, this was even before COVID, 93 million people were living near poverty. That means all of those tens of millions of people not knowing on any given day how they're what would happen if they got sick, or if their children got sick, or how they're going to send their kids to college, or how they're going to get out from under those college loans. How could they not be in constant, so close to utmost despair? Absolutely. On any given day? And how can all manner of societal pathology not emerge from that?
Yeah, it's so true. It's so
Thank
true.
you, Linda. I thought your words were very eloquent. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Betsy, would you support reparations?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You have any further ideas about what's happening with Black Lives Matter now, and the way the country, obviously, I think we've reached a critical mass. There's a general agreement now. People understand it's not just systemic racism. It's specifically this idea of the execution of unarmed Black men that continues to happen. What will you stand for in the Senate when you're there?
I think, and you said something a while back, it's not, this is not about people being nicer, right? This is a system of oppression, and starting with slavery, that has gone, starting with the genocide of Native Americans when white people first came to this country, that has worked its way into every corner of our society, into the way we think about things, the way we do loans, the way we do business development, the way we do education, the way we do testing, standardized testing, the way, every single aspect. And, I think about, so we've been in quarantine, right, for 6 weeks? And, you watched in Michigan that people went crazy because they couldn't get their hair cut and they couldn't get their nails done being in quarantine. Imagine being in quarantine for 400 years from the benefits of this society.
Many people
Imagine.
have been economic lockdown before COVID.
way before. And so I think that, and something that you said, Marianne, that has stuck with me all this time is the difference between sort of helping out and making things a little better and reparations is that there is a moral component to it.
That's right.
Say, we have been wrong, we have done wrong. And until we acknowledge that and own it, and then go to start to fix it and start to repair it and heal it, all the better things, the nice things. I mean, it's the same thing I think with the police. This is not the whole idea. This is not to make police nicer. We have gotten them, and I think it's society's fault. We have, as I said, we've criminalized things that we didn't want to deal with or we couldn't figure out how to deal with. But this is about understanding the systemic nature of it and really getting at that. And,
And this also circles back to the difference between a real progressive candidate such as yourself and the more establishment corporatist candidate, who even among the Democrats, who will go for incremental change. And it is too late for incremental change. Martin Luther King said, incremental change, the status quo will co-opt it at every step, and you will end up with the tranquilizing drug, he said, of gradualism. We need fundamental change. The police system is irrevocably broken. This is not just a matter of a few bad apples. And when it comes to race, it's a matter of a debt that is owed. It's not just a matter of giving more money to historically Black colleges or giving more loans for home ownership. It is the recognition, like you said, the moral imperative of a recognition of a debt that is owed, so that we can have a healing, an emotional, psychological healing that goes beyond just economics. It makes me so excited to think about you and people like you being in Congress, particularly being in the Senate, who have an understanding of the new conversation. And that's what we're talking about here, everybody. This is the 21st century. This is not the 20th century, it's not the 19th century. And just like the 20th century mind was different than the 19th, the 21st century mind is different than the 20th. We have the 20th century mind was dominated by Newtonian physics. It was that the world is a big machine, and if you have a problem, you just tweak with the pieces of the machine. But this is the 21st. It's not old science now. It's new science. It's quantum physics. It's the recognition, as one British physicist said, it turns out the world is not a big machine. It's one big thought. We need to rethink everything. Our consciousness about these issues has to change. Now, I personally think a lot of women have a greater tendency towards that, because the propensity, I said when I was running, we need some mothers in the White House. You can take that however you want.
Instead of the mother that's there.
There is something here about putting the children first. My mother, Betsy, when I was a child, my mother always said, we have to put the children in your home first. And when I was growing up, I thought my mother was too old-fashioned, and I wanted to go out into the world and do something more important. But you grow up enough and you understand enough, and to know that taking care of children and taking care of your home is as important as anything else. But even more importantly, that has to mean everybody's child. And it has to mean that the earth itself is our home.
Yeah.
And with 13 million children, even before COVID, who were going to school hungry in this country, 13 million, 100,000 homeless children, even before COVID, 12,000 children a day on this earth who starve. And I think that people are coming to realize these are not inevitabilities.
Well,
these are the products of bad public policy, and they can be replaced by good public policy. You had something to say?
Well, no, and I think that's the thing that's the moment that we have before us is, and the thing that keeps me going, and I often get asked, you've been doing this for a long time, why are you still optimistic? Why are you still doing this? And the thing that fuels me is it doesn't have to be this way.
It doesn't have to be.
And we are not that kind of people, collectively or individually.
And that's Americans, this is Americans. We don't do that. Think, well, it can't be done.
So I really think that, and I also agree that I think that I used to say that some of that mama bear energy, was a single mom. I've been a single mom for 18 years, and of these 3 beautiful girls, and I would be the mama bear. You come after my kids, and not just mine. My house was the house where all the kids came and hung out, and I love that. But it's that we have to take care of every child, and with that same mama bear energy. And I think this is the time. The one thing I want to say about that optimism, though, is here's why I'm optimistic, even though we have so many things crashing in around us right now. I think I've come to call it our social security moment. when Social Security was first suggested, everyone said, oh my God, are you kidding? That's crazy. No one's ever going to do that. Until the Depression came. And then there were millions of older and disabled people who couldn't eat, who were freezing to death in their homes, who couldn't pay their rent. And we found the will and we found the way to create Social Security and lift millions of people out of poverty, old people and elderly and disabled people. So this is now, we have a lot of things. We have healthcare, we have climate, we have the economic collapse, we have racism, but this could be, I think this is our Social Security moment where we can actually move these policies forward. If we elect bold people, if we elect people who aren't afraid to call it what it is, and then try new things, take some risks. When I talk to senior citizens, I often ask them who their favorite president was. And inevitably they talk about FDR, they say Franklin Roosevelt, right? And I say why, and then they say all the things, all the programs that he did. And I say, what my favorite thing about Franklin Roosevelt is, besides that my father used to deliver propane to his porch in Hyde Park. Yes, I know, it's a fun story. But my favorite thing is that for everything that we remember about him, they tried 10 other things that didn't work. And so they would try it and say, well, that didn't work, let's try this. We have moved away in politics from the ability to try a solution to some of these intractable problems, and saying, oh, wait a minute, that didn't work. Okay, let's tweak it this way until we find the thing that actually works, that actually helps, that is actually the pathway that we want to go. And we have to find that again in ourselves and in each other to say, we've got to try things. We've got to take some risks and try doing something a different way. The definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And that applies to our economy, it applies to our climate, and it applies to the way we.
When it comes to something like Medicare for all, when it comes to something like the new Green Deal, when it comes to something like a Department of Peace, a Department of Children and Youth, reparations, really, there's not a question of finding something that works. It's a matter of creating the political will to actualize those things that work. And of course, to recognize where the resistance comes from. It comes from a matrix of corporate tyranny. As long as the hundreds of billions of dollars from health insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies and food companies and gun manufacturers and oil and gas companies and big agricultural companies and defense contractors are able to wield such undue influence on our government, then we feel sometimes like there's so much power in them and so little power in us. And that's what we have to reclaim. No, there's a lot of power in us. If we want to see you elected, we can get you elected, but we're going to have to work on it. That's the thing. And this is why we're doing the down ballot progressive candidate summit. You don't need me to tell you about the presidential election. You know everything you need to know about the presidential, but I hope you're feeling that with this summit, you're meeting some of these extraordinary congressional and senatorial candidates out there. As you've been talking tonight, Betsy, I've been thinking, wow, how exciting it will be to see you, a senator, you talking and saying, we're going to do it this way. And we have to have the audacity to dream again. We have to have the audacity to use our imagination and to recognize it could be different. This country can choose another way.
Yeah, we can choose another way. And I think people are ready.
I do too.
Cory Booker said this thing that has also stuck with me, which is as candidates and as leaders, we can either be thermometers or thermostats. And thermometers take the temperature, and then, we've gotten into a politics where you never get ahead of where people are. You never get a hold of what the polls say. You ride that wave behind them. Those are thermometer candidates. Thermostat candidates are people who say, we're in trouble. We have to go fix this. And this is the direction we need to go. Let's set the direction and let's go do it.
Well, that's what I call the politics of people pleasing, where you just say what you think people want to hear rather than saying what that people need to hear. And I have found in my own experience that when you do say what people need to hear, they're not stupid. They go, wow, you're right. I hadn't thought of it that way. There's an educational aspect to good politics. And in order to do that, though, we have to resist the influence of some of the establishments in both political parties that actually is an obstruction to this kind of newness and recreation that's so much the tone of the day.
And
I
resist the
think you're
fear.
fabulous, Betsy. I always have thought you were fabulous, but I just think you're at full blossom now. I wish you the very, very best. I hope all of you will remember this is BetsySweet.com. Let's replace Susan Collins, but let's just not replace her with any old Democrat. Let's replace her with a progressive candidate that stands for all the wonderful things we were talking about tonight. Please text your friends. Please send the YouTube around when you see this on my social media platform. Please give what money that you can. There is no amount that's too small. Put it on your own social media. Let people know. Use your voice. You have any final comments to make, Betsy, before we let people go on with their lives tonight?
I just think, I just want to say thank you, Marianne. I have been a huge fan for many, many, many years, and I am so grateful and honored to be with you tonight and for your leadership. And I just
I seem to have lost you.
across this country, there are people rising up, there are candidates, and we can do this. We must do this, or we are in trouble. So I think we're ready. I'm ready. If you know, I'm honored enough to be a senator from Maine, you know, I will go and do the people's business.
Can't wait to call you Senator Sweet.
I can't wait to have you.
For being here. Tomorrow night, we will be back with a candidate I can't wait to meet, Lisa Ring, who's running in Georgia 1st District. What a cool woman she is. Never met her, but I'm really looking forward to it. You might want to look her up before we meet. And then on Saturday night, we will be talking to Liam O'Mara in California, District 42. Thank you very much. I hope that you have felt illumined by the wonderful ideas that Betsy was sharing with us tonight. I hope you will go to BetsySweet.com. Do what you can. And as Betsy has been saying all night, we can make this happen. I love you, Betsy.
I love you too.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.